Retro.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continuously unexpected. So uncivilized.
Hello there, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode features the next installment of our Darth Bane book club. But before we get back to Korriban and discuss the goings-on there, Jay, want to remind everybody where we can be found on social media.
I would love to, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal is boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. The seal to the Sith tomb is open. And we are now broadcasting to the galaxy.
Nice.
And this will be our discussion of chapters 18 and 19 of Path of Destruction. So, Jay, here we go. This is our 7th installment. We're over halfway through the book now. And Bane is really coming into his own.
He sure is. So before we jump into chapters 18 and 19, let's quickly look back at where we left Bane in our last book club discussion. So in chapters 16 and 17, Bane fought his way back into relevance at the Sith Academy after secretly training with Kas'im and deepening his study of the ancient Sith. His uneasy alliance with Githany became increasingly transactional, with both trying to influence and outmaneuver the other. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood of Darkness continued to show signs of strain as its leaders struggled to balance internal politics with a costly war against the Jedi. So by the end of our discussion, Bane's challenge to Sirak and the fallout that followed had raised a bigger question. Has the Brotherhood lost sight of what it means to be Sith? So that question hangs over everything as we head into chapters 18 and 19. So with that, Dennis, would you read that summary?
Certainly. So in chapters 18 and 19 of Darth Bane, Path of Destruction, the Brotherhood of Darkness is beginning to crack under the strain of its war with the Jedi. As Sirak recovers and Githany shifts her loyalties, Bane's journey through Korriban leads him to a powerful realization about what the Sith have become and what they should be. By the end of these chapters, the split between Bane and the Brotherhood isn't just personal anymore, it's ideological, laying the foundation for a whole new Sith philosophy and setting the stage for a completely new vision of the Sith.
Yeah, so there's so much to unpack in these two chapters. Even though they're fairly short, there's definitely that transition that you were talking about that is coming up, and there's a lot at stake. So let's just jump right in. So chapter 18 starts with Kas'im noticing that Bane was absent from practice the next morning after the events of the conclusion of chapter 17. And so he kind of figures out why. And so he bursts into Qordis' chambers, and Qordis doesn't even react like he'd been expecting it. And Kas'im's really upset that Qordis may have, quote unquote, done something to Bane, but Qordis holds firm. And Kas'im's revelation that Qordis manipulated Bane is met with Qordis' reasoning that it was a kind of necessary evil. So Bane would learn for himself that the teachings of the Academy are to be accepted, possibly even embraced, because he believes that there's nothing to learn. There's no secrets in the Valley of the Dark Lords where Bane is heading off to. So, however, Kas'im senses that Qordis is a little scared by Bane, and Kas'im knows that Bane will survive. So at this point, do you think that Qordis is actually protecting the Brotherhood or protecting his own authority?
It's a little bit of both. There's for all this talk about the Brotherhood and that they aren't competing anymore, they're supposed to be operating as equals, but Bane sees through that. He sees that there's equality is, equality is a lie. It's a myth there that, the strong are supposed to dominate the weak are supposed to serve. And that goes back to the beginning of the book when he was still on Patros and he was talking to the Republic officers that were trying to recruit him. And, one of the things that come up is that, the Sith they don't treat everyone equally, that, and then, Bane kind of throws in their faces like, well, that's kind of attractive, actually. I'm a powerful guy, not so many words, but, he could be real successful there. And Bane did recognize in the previous chapters that this is, for all the ancient texts that he's read, this is not who the Sith are supposed to be. They're not supposed to be about distributing power. It is about the individual grasping power, the strong taking it and using it. Qordis also is jealous that it was Kopej that brought him here. This was not his own discovery in Bane. And Kas'im was instrumental in Bane's success. So Qordis can't claim responsibility for Bane's success in all of this. Kas'im, we talked about this a bit last time when Bane defeated Sirak. Kas'im shows up with his master's lightsaber and gives it to Bane. And as much as it's a reward for Bane becoming powerful, it's also Kas'im in his own way claiming Bane's success. That I was responsible for this guy doing this. In a way, he's almost marking Bane as his own apprentice in a similar fashion to the Rule of Two. And now, Kas'im's success has been driven off into the Valley of the Dark Lords, and Kas'im's not happy about this, nor should he be.
Right. And that's one of the reasons why I really appreciate Kas'im's character is that he can see, even though he's on board with the Brotherhood of Darkness, obviously, and he's part of the whole hierarchy, he sees the cracks in the structure. He sees and he can call it out. And I feel like would be one that could actually potentially make the structure stronger based upon what the Brotherhood believed at this point. But you're right, there's such a power struggle between Qordis and Kaan and, Kopej and all of them all at the same time that's the whole reason why Bane became so frustrated with it. And Kas'im's starting to see that too. So, and like you said, he was upset that Qordis was just like, well, he's going to learn for himself. I think that Qordis was kind of honestly hoping that Bane didn't return because we see, later on, and he talks about this, is that if Bane returns, he's just going to be a thorn in his side. He's obviously reacted to authority with, number one, disrespect. He is a loose cannon. He is kind of rebelling. He is showing that, the apprentices can kind of go off and do whatever they please, and there's no quote unquote repercussions for that. So I think there's a lot going on with Qordis and his little brain pan right now. So yeah, so that's a big part of that for sure. So then we switch scenes and we show up with Sirak now, and Sirak has currently spent 36 hours in a Bacta tank trying to recover from the beatdown that he got from Bane. And he's actually having a little bit of Bane PTSD after spending all those hours in the Bacta tank. And he actually, I don't know if he so much laments, but he at least remarks that, nobody came to see him while he was in the Bacta tank. But then he says, although it should be that way, because anyone who lost like that should be left alone with the shame of their defeat. So as he's getting ready to kind of gather his things and get the heck out of there, Githany shows up. And so she mentions Bane's name, and Sirak actually twitches at the mention of Bane, which I think is, big time. And then she makes a proposition to help Sirak defeat Bane. So she starts talking of Bane's strength, but also of her disappointment in Bane's inability to really fully embrace the dark side, to which Sirak asks, well, why do you think that's true? And she just simply says, well, you're still alive. And Sirak's like, well, I left Bane alive. And she's like, no, that's completely different. That's not even on the same page here, buddy. So, the whole thing with this, she goes on to say that Bane is either a weakling or a fool, and she wants no part of it. So Sirak kind of calls her out and says, well, you're changing your loyalties and your alliances a little too quickly for my sake. And Githany kind of plays the woman scorn card after that. And then she shares Bane's plans to journey to the Valley of the Dark Lords with Sirak, and then they agree to destroy him when he returns. So, yeah, I kind of feel like I know the answer to this already, but do you think that Githany was genuinely kind of hurt in some ways by the whole, you know, the betrayal, so to speak, by Bane and him going off on his own and doing all these things? Or is she just simply choosing the strongest path available and that she's actually embracing the teachings of the Brotherhood?
Well, here's the thing about Githany, and Bane kind of recognizes that she is doing whatever is in her best interest, which is what Bane is proposing this entire time. That it's what something it's going to come up in the next chapter. So I'm looking ahead a little bit here, but she is all about amassing power, and her hope was that Bane would kill Sirak. That would elevate her standing. It didn't happen, and now she's making another plan. And not to get too far ahead, because it's not in either one of the chapters we're talking about, but Sirak is right on the mark. You change allegiances a little too fast for my liking
Mhm.
here in this situation, and that's some foreshadowing that's going to happen here. But she's primarily interested in, again, what is in her best interest, not what's in the best interest of the Sith as a whole. And that is it's kind of funny, because like the apprentices, what the masters are afraid of here at the academy is that the apprentices are going to start knocking each other off in the shadows to elevate their own standing, which is exactly what the Sith, Bane would tell you the Sith are supposed to do. They're supposed to uh, promote themselves. They're supposed to seek that power. They're supposed to seek strength. They're not supposed to collaborate, because when they're doing that, no one's actually getting stronger. They're just distributing the power. And then the Brotherhood is like, well, that time's behind us. We're doing this for the greater good of the Sith. We're going to conquer the galaxy. We're going to defeat the Jedi. We're going to distribute power. Githany's not really about that right now. She's only into the Brotherhood to the extent that it gives her power. She's not interested in power for the Brotherhood's sake. She's not interested in Bane necessarily getting power. Although she seemed to develop some feelings for him in prior chapters, it all started off with him being a means to an end. And that's what
Mhm.
she's doing with Sirak here. He is a means to an end in this situation. And Sirak is right to be a little bit leery of her.
Mhm. And I do wrestle with this question even myself because I do think that there's undeniably some attraction there between Githany and Bane, and
Mhm.
it goes both ways. And as we're gonna find out, later, again, not to, get it too far into it, but that becomes a factor in something that happens in Bane's journey, so to speak. So that aside, I wonder to myself sometimes if Githany had been written as a male character and that puzzle piece of the attraction was taken out, would she be seen in the same way changing these alliances? Because I think you're right. It's just a means to an end. It's kind of like, well, okay, I'm not getting anywhere with this person. So they're weak. They're not going to serve my ultimate goals. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to use this person, which realistically is what Bane kind of champions when it
Mhm.
comes to the way that the eventual Rule 2 is set up. So, I mean, is she truly so far off the base of doing things the way that she's doing? But I do think in some ways she is kind of scorned. She is feeling a little bit scorned because I mean, it's pride. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just human pride when someone does something like that to you and you thought you had some sort of a connection. So that's kind of a weakness for her, I think, as well, don't you?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, I think y as much as she may have been feeling some scorn, she knew how to use that to manipulate Sirak
Sure.
in this situation. And,
Mhm.
she had to convince him. And so it's kinda like, she went in and saying, as you talked about earlier, he proved that he's not the person I thought. He doesn't understand the dark side. How do I know? Because you're still alive. And then, as you pointed out, his response was, "Well, I let him live." And then she points out the difference. It's like he challenged you. He wasn't even on your radar, and so you left him alive because it's a sign of contempt. Like this guy is so far beneath me, I don't have to worry about it. The converse of that is Bane plotted for months to destroy you, and when he had a chance to put you to death, to end you, he didn't do it because he's afraid of his own power. That's not the dark side. He's weak we got to get him out of the way. You want vengeance and stuff, and this and the other. And then to sell it, it's like, when you watch those videos and like, so, that's spoofs, like with the directors, like, do this, that, and the other. And the person like goes, takes a deep breath and they do the little finger thing and they, they go 1, 2, 3, and they look down, they look up and they put on their game face and they go into acting. That's almost the way she was described here. She looked down one moment and then she looked up and she had the tears in her eyes and she was furious. And she did exactly what Sirak needed to see to buy this, which was the first time in this part of the chapter that I was disappointed with Sirak, because what was our introduction to Sirak? If I can take over the conversation for just a second.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Up until now, Sirak has been the Sithari boogeyman in this book.
Yes.
He
Good way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, he was promoted as this perfect Sith being. We got very little from we didn't get any scenes from his perspective. He had his 2 little Zabrak henchmen that followed him around. He is almost like the Draco Malfoy from Harry Potter, of the Slytherin here in the Korriban and the Academy of Korriban, I should say. And when we get to see him in this chapter, it is from his perspective. He's woken up in the back tank. He's made mention that no one's come to see him. And he's like, that's exactly right. No one should be embracing my weakness. And I've healed. There's brand new clothes. I've got to now reclaim my spot amongst the Sith Academy. This is something that Bane would approve of. Putting aside the fact that Sirak wants to kill him at that point, it is Sirak is taking the logical steps to reclaim his power, to reclaim his place, and to defeat Bane and reclaim his spot. Sirak is not talking about the greater good of the Brotherhood of Darkness. He's talking about himself the same way that Githany is. And this just gets back to my comment that, the apprentices are all jockeying for position. They're not about promoting the Brotherhood at this point. And this is the thing that they're all afraid of. That, this is, and we get towards the end of this chapter when Kaan and Kopej are talking about, it's like, we can't bring the apprentices here because they're going to find these opportunities to off each other. And we need them working for the greater good of the Brotherhood. And so it's a legitimate concern, but for the Brotherhood, even though it's not a legitimate Sith concern. And so anyway, point being is that, it was fascinating to get Sirak's point of view after him just kind of we never got his point of view up until now. And he was this guy that was in the way. And now I don't want to say we have empathy, but we understand his motivation in this. And not for a moment does Bane really consider him as someone that he can be allying with at any point, because they have similar points of view. It is, Sirak is just an obstacle, but he's a more intelligent obstacle than we think. He also doesn't fall for Githany's, feminine wiles, so to speak. He interprets them, but he's not doing any of this because he's trying to get her favor. He talks about her grace and, he's heard of her. He knows who she is, but it's not like, well, now's my turn, whereas we were talking about earlier in this book, I think it was Kaan or Qordis, doesn't matter how they put a hand on Githany's hip to try and show, possession of her at this point.
Right.
That's not what he's doing at all. It's like he's interpreting what she's doing as a woman scorn, but he's not trying to step into that spot. So that's some of my observations.
No, and I'm so glad, and I don't want to spend too much more time on Sirak because we have a lot of other stuff to discuss, obviously, but I'm so glad that you brought all that up, because with Sirak, I feel like he's almost, in some ways, you can glance over him as a stepping stone in this whole story. But realistically, maybe under different circumstances, he and Bane could have been allies, because you're absolutely right. Sirak does align a lot more with what Bane's philosophy is than what the Brotherhood of Darkness is. And I think, going back to what you were saying too about the way that the apprentices are trying to one up each other, but yet they want all of this togetherness. It's a very, very much like a double-edged sword. They want to encourage this kind of rivalry between the apprentices, but not so much that it disrupts the hierarchy, if you will, of the Brotherhood. And it's almost like you can't have your cake and eat it too, kind of things. And that's, again, one of the things that I think Bane sees as the cracks in the infrastructure, for sure. So, but yeah, Sirak could definitely have been an ally, I think, for Bane, for sure. For sure. All
Mhm.
right, so yeah, moving on to Bane himself. So now we are going to focus on Bane's journey. He's actually journeying across Korriban's wastelands at this point, and they talk about him being sustained against the elements and his own needs by the Force. So he's got like these hydration tablets, but he's pretty much just, on a mission. So when he gets to the Valley of the Dark Lords, it's at twilight. And they say he arrives at the valley at twilight's gloom. And I just think that's such a great little symbolism because he's basically right on that verge between what he was going through and what he might be able to become. So we talk about symbolism a lot of times in Star Wars, and I just thought that Karpshin did a really good job with that.
Mhm.
So he gets to the first temple, and it contains this archway that has letters that he doesn't recognize. So I'm assuming that that's probably the Sith alphabet, like this ancient Sith alphabet that maybe he has not run across yet in his you know indulgences in the archives.
Mhm.
But when he goes in, he was warned against these pelco bugs before he got there. But these little pelco bugs are very interesting because they're attuned to the Force, but they're wary of him because they can sense the dark side in him. So they actually
Mhm.
kind of stay at bay around the glow of his glow rod, his blue glow rod that they say. This whole thing kind of reminds me of a dark version of an Indiana Jones archaeological expedition
Yeah.
mixed with the mummy and those little scarab bugs that were trying to get at them, the whole time. So I think that was really a cool visualization there. So he gets to one of the tombs and he talks about how, he's not interested in grave robbing or anything like that. Like he just wants his answers. And so he gets on top of the sarcophagus and he realizes that this whole tomb's been robbed, it's been defiled, even the sarcophagus was defiled. He becomes extremely frustrated at this point. And so he just kind of throws his head back and he says, "I'm here, master. I've come to learn your secrets. Show yourself."
Mhm.
So this whole thing kind of makes me wonder who ruined these tombs to begin with. Was it was it the Brotherhood themselves? And if so, what does that say about their respect for Sith history? Because obviously they don't really believe in any of it anymore anyways, but who do you think desecrated these tombs?
It wasn't the Brotherhood, I don't think. I think it was, as Qordis says at some point in this, it's that there's nothing left there because when the Sith civilization was falling, the old Sith lords took a lot of the artifacts with them in order to
Right.
safekeep them as they dispersed across the galaxy. Then the Jedi conquered this planet, and they took away what was left to hide it so that they could try and prevent the Sith from rising again. And then you just had Tomb Raiders that came and took what was ever was left out
Mhm.
of everything that was going on. So, that was one thing Qordis was right. Is like, you're not going to go find anything that's going to give you more power there. Of course, Bane comes to a different realization. So there is something to be gained from him doing this. And we'll get into that when we get to the next chapter there. However, to take an aside on this, one of the things that is interesting is, Bane is expecting the spirit of an ancient Sith to show up at some point and impart some sort of wisdom on here. And I don't know how much access Carpesian had, but we've at least since, or maybe it was around that time, George Lucas has basically told us that the Sith aren't capable of turning into Force ghosts because they aren't capable of being selfless, which is what is required. The giving up of oneself, one's ego, one's and everything like that, so that they can become one with the Force and become this Force ghost presence here. The Sith can't do that, so they could not have shown up as a Force ghost, no matter how badly they wanted to do so. That was beyond them in this situation. So whether that was something Carpesian did intentionally or knew about, I don't know. But I do kind of like the way that it has merged and melded so well with George Lucas's own philosophies on why the Sith can't have ghosts. When he does the Yoda, he being George Lucas and Dave Filoni, when they do the Yoda series arc later, when he goes to, they call it Moribund, it's a apparition, but it's not a Force ghost of Bane that he encounters, because again, they aren't capable of doing that. They aren't capable of being selfless in a way that will make that possible.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing for Bane. I think when he looks at the sarcophagus too, he sees the tomb, and he even mentions like little bits of bone that were probably the fingers or whatever of this Sith master. He sees them as two different states of being. There's the physical form of the masters, and then there's this history and culture that he can learn from them. And so I think that that's a very important distinction, but yet he also takes time to appreciate the letters, the runes, if you will, the fact that there were crests above the tombs, which that one really struck me too, because I was like, ooh, that's kind of really cool. I never really, heard of that before, or paid attention to that. So I think it's just really cool that this focuses on the idea that the Sith actually once possessed kind of a true civilization, complete with symbols, history, and culture. It wasn't merely just lightsabers and armies necessarily, that there was a lot more to it than that. And then the Brotherhood is just choosing to completely turn their back on that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, because look, you can kind of, I'm hesitant to make this comparison, but it's not like every noble in ancient Egypt has a pyramid built for their tomb in this
Right.
situation. It's the
Mhm.
people at the top of the hierarchy here. Same thing. These Sith masters, these Sith lords, from these ancient Sith lords, they earned these tombs. They earned these temples. And it's not like the Brotherhood of Darkness is not going to be building a tomb for everybody. These tombs were monuments to who these Sith lords. They were monuments to their powers. They were in, there's a bit of a contradiction, which we'll talk, I don't know, but we'll talk about when we get to chapter 19, when Bane has some realizations here. But it is, there may have been some culture there, but it really was not designed around a whole lot of Sith being equal and diluting power amongst them. No, there was someone who was imposing his will on everybody else. He was the strongest and everyone else was weaker, and they were serving him. And that's not what the Brotherhood is doing.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I think that's a good observation for sure. So yeah, so Bane's a little frustrated at this point. So we switch back to we're at Rusan next. And so we see Kopej, and he is super frustrated. He's walking through the camp. He's looking at the state of the army. He's like, what is going on here? And he walks in and he starts to talk to Kaan. And he's basically criticizing the Brotherhood's leadership at this point. And Kopej accuses Kaan of leading the Brotherhood to destruction. And he says, you know what? We need the Korriban masters here. We need all of the reinforcements that we can get. Even the apprentices on Korriban are stronger than the masters on Rusan. And so Kaan at first is a little bit put off by this, but then all of a sudden he has this shooting pain. And they even in the book say that it results in a sort of palsy. And it kind of reminds me of like Vanellope von Schweetz in Wreck-It Ralph. Like there's this glitch that happens to him. And then all of a sudden he's like completely calm. And Kopej even says that there's this like violet aura around him. And then Khan all of a sudden is like, Kopej, you're correct. The Academy on Korriban would be contacted to send reinforcements, And so what do you make of that? Like, is this the first visible sign that the dark side is actually beginning to consume Khan? Like, what the heck just happened here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have to admit that I was a little hazy. My memory was a bit hazy on that, and even thinking ahead to what happened there. But you know, this the Sith had this advantage where they were bringing more forces to bear on Republic shoulders, reinforced with a few Jedi in any of the battles. And so they're winning. Then Lord Hoth assembles this great Jedi army of masters and knights and apprentices, and they've started to win. And, Kopej is like, what are we doing? Why are we keeping things in reserve? It's either now or it's never in this
Mhm.
situation. And so, everyone's been deferring to Kaan because he's got the charisma and he's been keeping everybody together. And as much as they're not supposed to have, an emperor, so to speak, a central figure that's leading them all, they do recognize in their way. See, this is the hypocrisy that Bane would point out. And, I hesitate to use that word because we believe more in equality, right? We've been, our society is structured around contributing to a greater good that benefits everybody so we can have an ordered society. But the hypocrisy for the Sith is that they're trying to create this equality. Well, that's a very un-Sith-like technique, they're so that they can win when they should be consolidating their power in an individual. And that's what they've been resisting doing with Kaan this entire time. But still what happens, Kopecz recognizes a problem, and instead of just doing something about it, he goes and defers to Kaan to make a decision.
Mm-hmm. Well, it goes back to a lot of the things like we talked about in our last discussion that even Kas'im was pointing out. It was Kaan's decision to do this. It was Kaan's decision to not honor the title anymore. It was Kaan's decision to do all of these things. So I do think that the other masters in the Brotherhood to defer to him because obviously he's kind of their grandmaster, if you will. But I think again, Kaan, like you said, why are we keeping all of these armies in reserve? Kopecz is calling them out and saying, no, we need them now. And originally, again, it's just bizarre that Kaan was kind of against that, but then he had, like I said, the Vanellope von Schweetz glitch, and then he's like, oh yeah, I think we should do this now all of a sudden. So I'm wondering, and we see, again, I don't like foreshadowing on here. We can see that how this almost makes him manic in a way, and that going back and forth between his realities almost is very unsettling. And this is kind of setting the stage for, okay, what's really going on with Kaan and how is this going to affect things later on? So I think that it's a fascinating way that Karpshin set this up for us at this point.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So at this point, then we switch back to Bane, and Bane is, like I said, frustrated, and he's decided he's going to head back to the academy. So what originally had taken him just a day or so to get there when he traveled out, it says in the book he had been traveling for 13 days at this point without food. So he had, again, sustaining himself through some hydration packs and that kind of thing, but he had not eaten. And he had a couple of encounters with the Tukata. And the Tukata are like the guardian hounds of the tombs. And again, I think this is a really awesome visualization that these guardians are there to like protect the tombs, even though it's been millennia, that they've been needed there, but they just kind of follow their instinct. So Bane ends up fighting some of them, and he's was able to defeat one of the packs, which they eventually left him alone after that, which is cool. And so the thing of it is that now that he's taken the 3 days to get back, he's admitted to himself that Qordis was correct about the tombs, but very, very wrong about how the Sith had actually been perverted. So it wasn't actually the Jedi. It was, as you alluded to earlier, Qordis's view on equality. And this is where that quote comes in, where he says, equality is a myth. The strong are meant to rule, the weak to serve. So as he approaches the academy, he decides that Githany would be his only ally, that she alone understood the true nature and power of the dark side. So interesting. This is the philosophical foundation, obviously, of what will eventually become the rule of two. So is this the moment that Bane becomes the true reformer of the Sith in this revelation that he has? Or is this just the groundwork for it at this point?
Well, the seed was planted chapters ago, and it's been germinating, and now it started to blossom in this case, because first he was going to the ancient texts when Qordis and the others are telling him, why are you wasting your time? And this, that, we've evolved past that. You need to be interacting with our fellow apprentices and the masters and learning what the Brotherhood of Darkness is about. But he's like, but there's so much that the ancient Sith can teach us. And that's one of the first steps. where the master has the power, the apprentice craves it, the apprentice learns from the master, and eventually supplants the master. Now he's taking this, which is like the other thing he says in this chapter is that he knows the true path of the Sith is not through the might of an army, but through cunning. And so this notion that we're all going to band together and then wipe out our Jedi enemies, well, then what? Distribute power? You might as well just start reciting the Jedi code, is I think what he says in this situation. And so he needs someone who understands that this is not about the greater good for the whole. It is about personal power. It's about strength. And the only one he can see embracing that is Githany in this moment. And so yeah, she's of a like mind, but he doesn't really realize that Githany, she's more scheming than she is. I'm not doing good at explaining this. She's got part of it right. She's scheming and she's looking to become the person in charge. But in the meantime, she's like not necessarily acquiring the power along the way. That's why she keeps looking for these cat's paws, whether it's Bane or Sirak or whoever. It's because they're more powerful than her, and she can use their power as opposed to lying in wait and developing her own power and acting with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love the way that Carpushan lays this out too, because as Bane believes Githany being his only ally, we know she's plotting against him. It's just excellent dramatic irony at this point. So just setting things up for, a further confrontation down the road for sure. So then what happens is Qordis receives the message from Kaan about sending reinforcements to Ruusan about the same time that he receives word that Bane is returning, which really kind of annoys him big time. And so he decides at this point, you know what, we're going to elevate all of the apprentices to the ranks of Dark Lords of the Sith. They're going to get given lightsabers and seats in the Brotherhood of Darkness. So before we even move on, I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be, but do you think that making everyone a Dark Lord cheapens the title? And how do you feel about that all of a sudden, like, oh, like the old Oprah Winfrey show, you get a lightsaber and you get a lightsaber, kind of a thing. How do you feel about that?
Well, okay. No, I don't feel like it cheapens it, because here's the reason why. The title, Bane recognizes it's a stupid title when everyone gets it to begin with. They aren't using the Darth title, they're just using Lord Kaan, Lord Qordis, Lord Kas'im. And so that title is basically given to everyone that gets out of the academy at this point. So it doesn't really cheapen anything, but because it was kind of meaningless to begin with in this situation. The part I love about this is that Qordis is a schemer whose schemes keep not working out. So he thought he'd gotten rid of Bane by sending him to, enraging him and basically driving him off to the Valley of the Dark Lords. And then Bane comes back. And he's like, well, this is great timing. This is a mess.
Right.
I can't send this guy.
I was like, yeah, he was annoyed.
Yeah, I can't send this guy to Ruusan because he might refuse to go. And then if he does that, then other apprentices will be like, wait a minute, I don't have to follow orders. And then they might start not defecting, but leaving, going, of their own accord, or they'll get to Ruusan and they'll be infighting as they're jockeying for position. So the one thing Qordis is right about, which I've been kind of alluding to over the course of the conversation, is that these apprentices, in a way, are performing more like the ancient Sith that the masters are, because they are looking up for their own personal power. They are looking for their own position in the hierarchy. And this is, that's why they got that rule that you can't, they're not supposed to hunt down the apprentices in the hallways and in the shadows and stuff like that, because they're trying to put that behind them. But they also aren't consistent in punishing this type of thing. Let Bane get away with it when he killed, what's his face, Quorroth, chapters ago. And so yeah, and I just love this whole thing. It was like Qordis is thinking, well, I'm gonna have to figure out a way to make amends now that Bane is back on this, and we'll see how he does that here in just a second.
Well, one thing I do have to give Qordis credit for is that at least he's not like, it's fine, everything's fine, we're all fine here now, how are you, kind of thing.
Right.
He realizes, okay, this could really throw a wrench into my works. And like we've been saying, that he's admitting the possibility of the dissolution of the Sith if Bane disobeys orders. So he sees that as something that could potentially happen, even though, like you said, his plans just keep getting foiled. At least he's able to see it. And I think that at least that's something that he has going for him, if anything. So
Right.
just an observation on that. So then we switch to Sirak, who visits Githany to tell her that Bane has returned, and she's kind of like, "Oh, he didn't come to see me first." Like she's a little, "Oh, really? Like he went to get food first, not come see me?" Like, he needs to survive by seeing her instead, but whatever. And then they plot their moves to kill Bane. So Githany tells Sirak to wait in the archives with Yvra and Loke, and they're gonna kind of do their thing. So that's kind of a quick little scene there. So the big thing is this final confrontation between Qordis and Bane. So Qordis visits Bane after Bane has his big old meal and a big old power nap. And he tells Bane that, "Oh, this was the final phase in your training." And I was thinking to myself, gee, this sounds a little familiar. Kind of like,
Yep.
"Oh, yeah, this was your Jedi trial, Ahsoka."
Mhm.
After the fact. And I know that this one came, before the other, I think, right? Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
it
yeah.
did. But at any rate, he was like, it was necessary so that Bane could understand and appreciate that the old ways are dead and gone. And he exclaims, like, with all of this fervor and excitement, "You are now a dark lord of the Sith." Uncomfortable silence, right? So he's like, "Okay, well, then I guess I'll give him this crystal." So he presents Bane with a crystal to replace his current one because he says that this one will be stronger, yada yada yada. So he's really kind of selling the Brotherhood hard to Bane at this point, almost like, okay, if you can't beat him, join him. I'm gonna sweet talk him, and maybe he'll switch what he's thinking. So he's like, all Sith must be united to defeat the Jedi. And I love Bane's reaction. He says, the Brotherhood will fail. Kaan does not understand the dark side. He is leading you down the path of ruin. So he just completely calls Kaan out and is like, dude, you just don't even know what you're dealing with here. But Qordis warns Bane that this talk can be considered treason, and he promotes the Brotherhood as the way to understand the dark side. And Bane is just thinking to himself that there is only one place in the galaxy that he could go to learn it. And we're not told where he's going at this point.
Mhm.
So that is going to be where we get to in the next section. So, what is your take on this whole exchange between Qordis and Bane at this point?
So several observations. First off, Qordis shows up, and I too also thought of Ahsoka when, at the end of season 5, the Clone Wars, after she'd
Yeah.
been accused of being the murderer, and she was put on trial, and then she fled, and she was eventually proven, innocent, and Barriss was the traitor, yada yada yada. And so the Jedi are like, well, they were a little bit more diplomatic about it. Like this was the equivalent of a trial, and so we want to make you a Jedi Knight, and we trust you. You've proven that you're capable. This, that, and the other. A little bit of face saving amongst the Jedi at this point because they were so badly wrong, and they now had to figure out a way to smooth things over with the apprentice. Qordis is in a slightly different position, and it's not that he didn't support Bane; it's that he was actively working against Bane, and he is concerned about Bane leaving, and so he's coming in trying to save face. And he's like, you had to learn these things, and now that you see it, right? And no hard feelings here. Take this crystal. It's more powerful. So, see how good a guy I am. Hey, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But
Right.
and so, and then Bane throws it back in his face. It's like, you're wrong. The Brotherhood's going to fail. You don't understand the dark side. Khan's leading us down a path of ruin. And this infuriates Qordis because he was extending the olive branch. He was trying to find a way to integrate Bane back in because he was assuming Bane was going to come back and be humiliated by his failure to find anything in the valley. And as we discovered, Bane was disappointed with that, but he did learn the lesson, which is that the Brotherhood of Darkness, the Jedi aren't to blame for the extinction of the Sith. It's the Brotherhood of Darkness right now because they
Right.
aren't following the dictates of the Sith.
Mhm.
And so he is, and that's why he's considering someone like Githany as an ally to rebuild the Sith Order under this new vision of this rule of two. Well, old, new vision, however you want to put it. This, as another aside, I can't help but wonder if this idea about this new, powerful lightsaber crystal was born out of video game mechanics, because Carpesian worked on the Knights of the Old Republic game. He was one of the writers for that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you do is you find more powerful kyber crystals to power up your lightsaber and stuff like that. And so this struck me as very much a video game mechanic more than anything. That, Qordis explains it as a synthetic crystal. It's more powerful than the natural one the Jedi use. Well, we know that that's not even continuity anymore. This is very much a Legends thing, that, Sith get their red lightsabers by bleeding a kyber crystal.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And there's no synthetic crystals in this at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a Legends thing, which took me right back, because of course reading all of the expanded universe / Legends stuff, that's what we thought the red crystals was they were
Right.
synthetic. They weren't bled. So that's definitely kind of brings us right back to that for sure. So I have a few questions for you though. Do you think at this point Bane is becoming more evil or more philosophically consistent with his ideas?
Well, I can't say that this idea that the strong should rule, the weak should serve is a good philosophy, right? It's the comment I made earlier in this discussion was that a lot of modern Western societies, and Eastern societies for that matter, are based around this idea that we consolidate the power in an elected government that works for the greater good of all the people. And you usually reject leaders that are amassing this power for themselves and perverting it, doing their own thing. And the Brotherhood of Darkness is attempting to amass power and distribute it amongst the Dark Lords for the greater good of all of them. Which, if they weren't trying to conquer worlds and subjugate everybody, we wouldn't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. Bane is saying, no, that's wrong. The dark side mandates that the strong accumulate the power in themselves and they don't distribute to everyone else. And then they basically bend others to their will. So yeah, he's becoming more thoughtful. He's becoming more philosophical, and he's understanding that this is the power. This is the key to Sith power. This is the key to embracing the dark side and getting more power. But there's not an admirable aim at the end of all this. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and I think evil is something that when you try to define it, what kind of bullet points do you use to do that? And I do feel like there's definitely some evil things that Bane does prior to this point, and also we know going forward that is going to happen, that you're just like, oh my gosh, that was just so incredibly evil. But I do think that at this point in time, just like with an athlete, their mental game is a huge part of their overall success. His philosophical consistency, I think, is an important part of this journey. And I think at this point, this is where he is starting to excel, because it's almost like the ding, 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 the light bulb went off when he goes to the Valley of the Dark Lords and realizes, okay, yeah, it wasn't the Jedi that did this. It was the way that the Kaan and the Brotherhood have defiled basically everything that the Sith are all about. So that's where I personally stand on that. But so who do you think actually best understands the true nature of the dark side out of all of our major characters? Do you think it's Bane? Or do you think it's Kas'im? Do you think it's Qordis? Do you think it's Githany? Like, who truly understands the true nature of the dark side, if there is one standout?
I'm not sure at the moment anyone has a complete understanding of the dark side, but Bane understands the power of the Sith, which is they rely on the dark side better than anybody right now. He's the one that studied the ancient texts. He's the one that realizes that distributing power is not growing power. And that's what the Sith are supposed to do. That's what the dark side is about. Githany she is a rung below, or maybe a couple rungs below Bane, and that, while she's seeking to become a Dark Lord, she's become a part of the Brotherhood of Darkness. It is always all this, everything she's done has been about elevating her own power. It's not been about graduating and becoming a member of the Brotherhood of Darkness. that's a given if she hangs out long enough. But what she's wanted is to climb the hierarchy, to amass her own individual power. So in that way, she's similar to Bane, but she's not taking the steps to grow her own power, if that makes sense. Like, the way that Bane studied and the like, and she's got her own brown and cunning but look, it's hard to discuss her without getting too much farther into the book that we haven't covered yet.
Right. It's true.
Right. And then Kas'im, I think, is close on that. He's bought into the Brotherhood of Darkness, but we've seen how he was intrigued by what Bane wanted to do. Bane wanted to gain more power, and Kas'im admired that. Just like when he stormed into Qordis' office, like, what'd you do? Why'd you send him off? It's because Kas'im recognized in Bane the right type of student. So anyway, those are my top three to answer your question. I think it's Bane above the other two. And, I think Githany and Kas'im occupy a similar rung, but for different reasons.
Yeah, no, I would agree with those rankings. Absolutely. And that's almost like our March Madness, our Sith Madness here bracket of
Yeah.
who would win out. And I think, at this point anyways, it's more about not necessarily even understanding the true nature. It's each of them are interpreting the dark side in a different way. And I think most of them are interpreting it in a way that elevates them specifically. But I'm with you. I do think that even though Qordis and Kaan say, oh, it's for the good of the Brotherhood kind of thing. Yeah, maybe not. But I do feel that Bane is at the top of the list because he truly sees what those ancient teachings say versus what the abilities actually are, incorporating the Sith code, all of the above. So yeah. So I think that's a very interesting little hierarchy there. So, we were talking about Sirak earlier, and do you think that Sirak would have made a good apprentice for Bane if things would go that direction? Or
He
could
has
have
that
gone in that
potential,
direction?
the thing is that here's where he falters compared to the others, is that he occupied that top rung of the students at the academy, but then he stopped. He wasn't doing anything to acquire more power. And he was, he's just basically like, yeah, I'm here. I'm going to graduate. I'm going to become a Dark Lord in this Brotherhood of Darkness. He was not seeking out, he just relied on his talent and his abilities, but he was not trying to figure out how to elevate. And that might have been the fatal flaw of him as a Sith, is that there was no one up until Bane defeated him that he was shooting for, that he was looking to replace. He had that top rung, and then he just maintained it as an apprentice. He wasn't looking to grow beyond that at that time. For him, it was just kind of like, yeah, I'll be a Lord, and that'll come when it comes. There's that potential, but he just basically didn't have that opportunity to express that drive that Bane and Githany did.
Might make for an interesting what if kind of exploration, I guess you could say. So that brings us to the end of these two chapters. Is there anything else that you can think of that we haven't addressed, or anything else that you wanted to
Nope, I think that
talk
covers
about
it.
further? All right, cool. So next month, make sure that you join us for chapters 20 and 21 of Darth Bane, Path of Destruction. And some very interesting things are about to happen in this next month. So make sure that you join us and tune in for that. So with that, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this discussion of Darth Bane, Path of Destruction. And before we go, first of all, we hope you enjoyed the episode. And if so, please subscribe to Podcast Stardust on the podcatcher of your choice. All of our episodes are on retrozap.com. So that is the easiest place to find all of our past episodes. And we'd love it if you would like, rate, subscribe on all of your podcatchers of choice. And just mention retrozap.com while you're over there. Check out all the amazing shows that are on the website. And right now, Enjoy Stuff has actually been pretty active, so you can check that one out. There's also Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Case Files, Animated Cast, Brews and Blasters, Dork Lair, Dunecast, Love, Death, and Robots Plus, Superhero Suite, and Warp Trails. So once again, we'd love it if you would rate and review us on your podcatcher of choice, and especially if that's Apple Podcasts. And also if you would share the show with your friends and just promote us in that way. So before we go, Dennis, can you let everybody know where those social media contacts are one more time?
Right. So we are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. We can also be found over on Pinterest, where we have some boards there. The show can be caught on YouTube and YouTube Music, audio only, if that is your preferred platform or choice. If you've got something longer to say that doesn't work ideally in comments or social media posts, reach out to us at podcaststardust@gmail.com, and we'll gladly take in your email and respond to that. And then, of course, if you're looking for Podcast Stardust t-shirts, stickers, and the like, check out our store at TeePublic, and you can find a link for that in the show notes.
All right. So coming up on the show on Friday, as usual, we will be diving into the latest and greatest Star Wars news. And then on Monday of next week, we are diving back into our Clone Wars rewatch with season 4, episode 4. And we're getting into a really fun arc with that one. So thanks for listening to episode 1061 of Podcast Stardust. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, stay away from the Falco bugs, and may the Force be with you.